and welcome. My name is Reed Blakemore, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council. On behalf of the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center and Africa Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, COP27 and beyond, leveraging U.S.-African business partnerships to accelerate clean energy deployment in partnership with Power Africa. African nations are faced with a dual challenge of drastically increasing access to modern energy and simultaneously taking action to mitigate the worst effects of climate change, to which sub-Saharan African nations in particular are the most vulnerable worldwide. Much work remains to be done on this front, as approximately 600 million people in Africa, a staggering 43% of the population, lack access to electricity. To expand energy access, 90 million people will need to be electrified per year in order to meet the goal of full access across the continent by 2030. U.S.-African business partnerships will have a key role to play in this effort. To talk today about how these partnerships can help meet these targets while not deviating from the path towards a net zero world, we're joined by a stellar suite of panelists. Before turning to these panelists, it's my job to get a few small housekeeping notes out of the way, however. First off, this event is public and on the record. We're live streaming via Zoom, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. We encourage you to post about today's discussion and share on social media using the hashtag ACEnergy and hashtag Africa's Time Has Come, and tagging us at AC Global Energy or at AC Africa Center. Those watching via Zoom can submit questions through the Q&A function located on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. If you're watching on another platform like YouTube or Twitter, unfortunately, we won't be able to take your questions, but that's a reminder to register next time and join us on Zoom. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Jacqueline Mutsitwa. Jacqueline is an international attorney specializing in business, human rights, and sustainability, and is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Reed, and welcome to you all. We've heard the stats. They're definitely staggering. What's exciting is that we do have an opportunity with the panelists today, not only to discuss these matters, but also to see what they're doing in their respective roles at the organizations they're with to support Africa in its energy transition. I'll go ahead and start today's panel by introducing our panelists and then go into our Q&A session. I'll start with Ayan Adam. She's a senior director at Africa Finance Corporation and the CEO of AFC's wholly owned subsidiary, Africa Capital Partners. She has close to 30 years experience and a strong track record in emerging markets, investment and asset management, as well as private equity, infrastructure, and climate change. Before AFC, she was at the Global Climate Fund, and before that at the CDC Group. Mark Carato is the coordinator for Power Africa. He's had a stellar career with USAID, including roles such as the USAID Director of the Office of Central America and Mexico. He was with USAID in Ethiopia and Afghanistan. It'll be great to hear from him because he leads Power Africa, which is now the world's largest partnership for development, with 160 public and private partners who have committed over $56 billion to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. Our other panelist, Ifeanyi Orajaka, is the founder and CEO of Global Village Electricity Projects, and he operates this business in Nigeria. He has close to a decade of experience in renewable energy systems design, business development, and project management. This business has effectively helped grow the number of people accessing electricity in Nigeria. He's an Obama Foundation Fellow, a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, and he's a member of the Africa-Europe High-Level Platform for Sustainable Energy Investments in Africa. Last but not least, we have Gia Snyder, who is the CEO of Natel Energy, which she co-founded in 2009. Gia is really passionate about finding economically viable solutions to mitigate climate change, foster sustainable development, as well as produce inexpensive renewable energy. She's held roles at Accenture as well as Constellation and Credit Suisse. I would like to welcome and thank all of our panelists for their participation today, and I really look forward to all of their remarks. And thank you all for attending online. It promises to be a very interesting conversation, and once again, hopefully one that we can carry on into action, not only at COP, but also after COP. I'll go ahead and start the panel with a question to Ifeanyi and then Gia. What type of enabling environment is necessary to accelerate investment and deployment of clean energy systems in Africa? You operate on the continent, so it would be really great to hear some of your personal experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot. I'll first of all start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from, and especially to say a big thank you to Atlantic Council and Power Africa for having me in this all-important high-level panel talking about how to leverage cross-Atlantic partnerships that would ultimately lead to unlocking and expediting the rate of energy access in the continent of Africa. Yeah, so as rightly mentioned by Jacqueline, I and my team, we operate in the continent. And I would say over the years, over the past 1 decade that we have been on this journey, we have actually seen it all. And I will first of all start by saying for creating a good enabling environment or having a good enabling environment for accelerated rate of energy access in the continent, we would require the right and investment, more importantly, investment-friendly policies in place by government and several of the government-related and public sector agencies in charge of these in the respective African countries. While in Nigeria, we have actually been able to get it right somewhat to a very significant extent by having what is now adjudged as the best, one of the best energy access and policy across the world as a date. But some other African countries are still pretty much struggling with this. So, and without the right policy in place, then it makes a whole lot of things difficult to follow through. And that particularly reminds me of the case of Nigeria prior to the 2016 when the mini-grid regulation, which is the guiding policy for energy access investment in the country was launched. And secondly, for considering all that is currently happening globally at the moment, the tensions in Europe and several other aspects of our regions of the world, then there needs to be a great deal of stability from a physical, economic, and political standpoint, because it's a no-brainer that there can be good business ecosystem, there can be investment flows in challenged regions of the world. Then also, and equally as important, is the need to have a significant level of standardization and consistency in public sector processes. This can be the importation processes, it can be the processes applicable to actually getting the right permits and permits and the likes that businesses operating in the clean energy space within the continent would need to actually operate their businesses in a legally framed manner. Then also equally important is the need to have readily available development data and indices that investors and businesses can ultimately leverage on to make their investment and business decisions as it relates to clean energy investments in the continent. So I would stop here for now and let Gea jump in on it, and subsequently, as the panel proceeds, I would also share some more insights.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. I think many of the points that you raised are absolutely critical. I mean, all of them are really important with respect to enabling investment in projects that will accelerate clean energy system deployment. Like if I to kind of build upon the points I think that you raised. So, definitely the understanding what the resource looks like. So being able to, appropriately characterize where you have good resources, and not only just where the good resources exist for appropriate clean energy development, but how those resources can be then accessed in a consistent and understandable manner from a regulatory, licensing, legal, permitting perspective is critical. And I think you touched on some really great examples there. Then as we think about how you actually get that electricity into the hands of consumers, particularly in the context that electrification the energy access is obviously a critical need, and the more that we can accelerate clean energy access to people across the countries of Africa is a critical part of an equitable energy transition. That comes down to really understanding how can we develop those projects, and then how can we get that energy actually connected in the right way, whether that's to a bigger grid, to a microgrid, in an off-grid situation, et cetera. So I think having processes that enable actually getting energy to the grid in a way that again, it's a grid connection is often something that's not necessarily is a challenge, has to be standardized. The more that it is standardized and becomes efficient, it helps reduce the cost of a very important part of the process of actually getting these projects to the point where they're delivering real value. I think another thing that we see in working with some of our partners is, and really where we play in this is we are, provide enabling technology solutions and equipment that then go into developing renewable energy projects. And another critical part of the process of developing projects is to have an understanding of how that energy is going to be sold, and then have a credit-worthy offtake, an ability to, and that's important because that then underpins the ability to finance the projects. So having a framework that allows for reliable projection of revenues to those projects is critical to then enable the investment necessary to mobilize capital to build the projects. I think another thing that we're also focused on is as we think about the energy transition and climate change, we also obviously want to have that be equitable, but also sustainable. And so thinking about what are the right kind of standards for ensuring that there's good engagement with local communities, that engagement is in a way that helps ensure that these projects are again, going to fit into the local community context, as well as to the broader, depending on their size, the broader context of the ultimate, where that energy is going to be delivered and consumed. And then, the other part of that, of course, is the environment. So that the process of how these projects are sited and then designed aligns with, again, sustainable metrics from an environmental impact perspective, are also pretty critical and things that we're very focused on.
Great. That is a perfect segue to Mark. I mean, Power Africa has been doing work on these legal and regulatory frameworks for years. So it'd be great to hear from you in the lead up to COP27, in the next couple of days, and then in the next month or so, the Africa Leaders Summit. How can U.S. and African businesses support Africa's energy transition requirements on its path to net zero?
No, thanks. And also want to echo my thanks to Atlantic Council and everyone else for being on today. Fantastic to be here. Fantastic group of panelists, many of which we know quite well. And I got to tell you, just as an aside, you want to get motivated in this work, just head out to the continent and see some of the work that Green Valley Electric's doing, and or get to the manufacturing hub of Natel in California, and you really kind of see exactly how fast this place can move. So I'm going to answer your question directly, only if you promise me and allow me to get back in on the enabling environment a point more directly later, because I think that really is part of what we bring to the table. The simple answer to what we're going to get done, I think now and to COP and after COP and beyond, is partner, innovate, and together deliver these solutions, right? Because I think what we're hearing already in the conversation is that this is such a multi-variable situation, some of which companies can control, some of which governments can control, some of which donors can catalyze, other partners can catalyze. But it's the working together of it all that it really has to happen. And I think we've seen the fact that we haven't gotten to where we want to be as a sector, the energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa, that there clearly is a lot of space to do this. And again, this is kind of why Power Africa started in the first place. Well, as you mentioned, the largest public-private partnership for development purposes out there, 12 U.S. government agencies, 20 development partners. In fact, we're over 200 partners altogether now, because 170 companies have signed on with specific letters of intent toward those top-line goals, which have remained the same since announced nearly 10 years ago, which is 30,000 megawatts and 60 million connections. Now, we do a lot more than that, and I can get into that in a second, especially on the climate bit, but those remain our North Stars. But when it comes to doing this in a green and clean way, and decarbonizing our future, that's also been baked in from the start. Fully about 76% of our projects that we propel to financial close in sub-Saharan Africa are based on renewable technologies. That's about 145 transactions, totaling 14 gigawatts and averting 7.7 million tons of CO2 emissions on an annual basis. So we've seen this for a long time, and we could talk a little bit why we've always been there. But one reason I will give, and the one I think that is coming into COP, which is, I think, right at the heart of what I think people are building as an implementation COP and not just a talking COP, is that the private sector has to be there. And the reason I think we've been 76% and those 145 transactions in renewable energy is because the market wants to go there. The market's moving there. Huge sums of capital want to make their way into sub-Saharan Africa. We know it hasn't happened to date. One fact that I always gravitate toward, because it just kind of helps me remind what we have to get done, is in 2019, there was somewhere in the neighborhoods of $630 billion in climate finance available, all in, right? Less than 1% that was private capital making in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's kind of crazy to think about, right? All these opportunities, all these things that Gia is talking about, that Fayani is talking about, others, ION's financing, all that at the end of the day is a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on around, which shows just what we have to get done to move it there. So, I'm heartened by the potential synergies we're seeing. I'm really excited that the U.S. is walking the clean energy talk with our new legislation. I think we are going to be able to together now expand markets, manufacturing, productive use, industrial applications, innovation, et cetera. It's why we're very excited at the ALS to hopefully introduce something that will mainstream that a little bit more. There's lots of hubs in the U.S. GIA is part of one of them that figure out a way to move finance, ideas, venture capital, others with technology partners, and then take a lead in pushing the clean energy revolution, not only in the US, but abroad. So I'm pretty excited about that coming forward as well. Of course, not naive at all to the challenges. Nothing that was said earlier has gone away. And in fact, post-COVID, we see numbers of access going up, of lack of access rather going up. That's incredibly hard to stomach. And we see industrial supply chains bogging down. We see inflation and rapid currency devaluation, all these things that make it even harder. All the problems stayed the same. Some of the solutions got a little bit harder to do. But again, I think we're on the right track. And I think because enough capital, enough innovation, and enough excitement's around this, it's going to get there eventually, right? The smart money will make the play now and be an early mover. And I think I can't emphasize that enough. I don't think people realize it. This is almost like an inevitable good a shift that we're going to see. Renewable energy is going to continue to come down. Batteries we're going to crack that code, both in duration and price. And all of a sudden, you're going to have renewable energy resources that already are on par 1-to-1 with fossil fuel options become just that much easier to do. And you're going to get a lot less risk concern when jumping into some of these. So I'll just end by saying, GE is another great example. I think that Green Village Electricity is an amazing company. We've been with them since the beginning of the journey in 2014 through one of our Power Africa partners, the U.S. African Development Foundation, which is a part of Power Africa that usually can get right at the tip of the spear. Find these ideas, find this kind of leadership, find this kind of ability to push the right solutions on African soil, and then try to support them. And then we try to make sure that then fosters a support all the way through the chain to hopefully they become the next big thing. I recently came back, I should add really quickly, I recently came back from West Africa as coordinator for the first time because of COVID for a really decently long trip in both Nigeria and Ghana. And I think, again, when you lack motivation, when you're sitting at the computer screen and you're saying, God, these are big problems, these seem a bit insurmountable, you go and you hit the ground and you see things like the buoy floating solar facility in Ghana. You see Nayo Tropical getting funding from Arm Harith and how they're going to push forward solar solutions. You see how people are actually now, I think, getting over the scale of finding ways to drive revenue into these systems, which make the deals bankable, which will eventually make them sustainable. And at some point until then, it's people like us who basically subsidize the market, who say, we're going to bet on accelerating the market. We know where it's going to go. We're going to be very, very prudent trying to figure that out. And then we're going to do what we can to get there faster, right? And as long as you get more revenue streams in these deals, whether they be generation, distribution, transmission, technology partners, all the above, you see this in appliances now, you see this in agriculture, you see this in healthcare, which we're very excited about. These bankable solutions will end up giving us enough revenue streams to make things sustainable over time. And then that capital will truly flood the continent. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Mark. And hopefully it's also answered the question that came in the chat from Benjamin Cross. There are definitely opportunities, whether it's in financing, technology, as you've mentioned. I think before we move on to another panelist, I'd like to go back to this question of enabling environment. Obviously, we've heard from Gia and Ifeanyi some of the challenges they face, but for Power Africa that's trying to solve some of these challenges. Share a little bit more about your experience and tell us some of the, I guess, positive examples of countries that are, really moving forward with respect to energy.
Yep, no, happy to. I think one thing I want to do is quickly summarize what I think a lot of people have said and what I think one of the main challenges is. And that is that all the deals, not all of them, but far too many of them these days are bespoke, right? We still don't have an ecosystem in sub-Saharan Africa where the ecosystem itself will drive the change. Not enough companies can afford to go there and put forward the forward capital and be not only ready to take on any advantage that might come their way, or opportunity rather that comes their way, but more importantly, push the opportunities with technology partnerships, offering somebody, being on the ground. Because as everyone said, not enough data. Deals take too long. Heck, we see situations now where people make a deal and 7 years later, they're still closing. Then all of a sudden, everybody's unhappy when the deal closes. Private sector's like, costs have dropped. I should be having a different margin. Government's like, my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to spend this much for energy. I can't afford it. Taking too long, too bespoke. The regs aren't standardized. The paperwork isn't standardized. We don't have economies of efficiency yet. And I think, if we all understand that as the basic goal, I think we're going to think about the solutions that will fall therein that will make this go faster, right? So that doesn't take away that there's some massive infrastructure issues in there as well. When we mentioned transmission, we all know that Brazil has a longer transmission network than all of Africa, one country, 126,000. India alone has 500,000 kilometers of lines. Transmission remains a massive issue that is a constraint, as is distribution, right? We talked about credible off-taker. A lot of these problems you just don't solve. And again, till revenue can come in and out of the system in a fluid way, we got to continue working on that. So what's Power Africa been working on? All of the above. To some extent, I think this is our secret sauce. We've always took an all-in approach. We might have started kind of focusing on transactions as the principal entry point, but when we hit something that was an enabling environment issue, then we blow it back open and try to make sure we hit that issue for all parties across all spots, and then hopefully to share across countries. So what's some great examples I can think about there? I think what South Africa is doing with municipal-led development on energy systems is excellent. I think some of the C&I stuff that different countries are looking at in terms of letting other people drive the market is a fantastic idea. I think we're seeing countries like Nigeria move really fast into rural electrification with all kinds of good ideas. Gia hit this earlier a little bit. It's no longer on and off grid, right? And I think those are kind of old school ideas of how we think about power, and we get ourselves into a binary construct, and we think only in binary solutions. A lot of people like Connexa, for instance, in Nigeria as well, kind of like there's power, there's a way to move the power, and people need to use it in productive ways. And we want to make sure it goes beyond just simple access. And if you have that mindset and you look at these solutions, all of a sudden you're going to be much more creative. The idea of distributed renewable energy, solar-based distributed renewable energy in a place like DRC, where maybe you put, instead of 100, you put 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 beyond on a single system, that's a grid all of a sudden, right? Now, is that on and off grid? It's kind of living in between. Good. All of a sudden, we're going to think about creative solutions that fit to problem, right? So Power Africa is out there trying to support those kind of creative solutions as well. I think on regulatory environment as well, we talked about it. A lot of it is making the cost of capital cheaper. So part of it is just trying to make the whole process work better. You know, I'll be a little bit provocative here and say, to some extent, concessional capital and blended capital solutions are so good that they've almost become a hindrance on some levels, because everyone kind of wants the same deal and everyone's chasing the same kind of money. And I don't think we actually parse risk out and pay for the right risk all the time. I think sometimes we just say there's a lot of risk in this kind, and currency hedging and sovereign risk and this, that, and the other. And we have a simple deal, and the deal needs to make X amount to come back and have the right risk reward ratio. And we kind of then overbuild, right? And then everyone wants a concessional capital to make sure they can have their deal, which makes sense. These got to make money. They should make money. But if we can do a bit better job of parsing out the right risk, paying down that risk, and then moving forward, then I think we're onto something way different, right? Then I think we get away from what we're looking at. Part of that is figuring out a way to do that make that capital cheaper, but in the right spots, and truly being and pushing ourselves on the development edge. You should have more of a premium to work in a frontier market than you do in a more stable market. The market should work that way. If it's not, then the market's not up to its efficient spots. Last part I'll say here, but one more example, is thinking creatively as well. One of the great successes we've all had over time is looking at VAT import for certain renewable energy projects. It's much what the US is going to do under the IRA. They're going to incentivize through taxes and other means, ways to push technology they know is a good market bet and part of the solution. So by working on VAT issues in Kenya, for instance, and bringing down the cost of solar components and making sure they don't get overtaxed, all of a sudden you open up an entire business model, right? And that on the back of mobile banking, which of course we know has been the spawn of a million different business models, and energy notwithstanding. All of a sudden then you have a new construct, and one you probably hadn't necessarily seen in the West, which is my last point I'm going to end on. We don't have to recreate everything we've done elsewhere in Africa. We can do new, better solutions. We should be doing new, better solutions. Learn what we can, learn from the mistakes, move on, take the best shot, and then be the first movers in a lot of these spots, capture the capital, capture the ideas. Hopefully folks like Natel and others who are bringing this new technology can be part of that revolution. I'll stop.
Thanks, Mark. I really like that. How do we find new solutions? How do we learn from what we've done in other places? So on that note, I'd like to move to you, Gia. What are some of the lessons that you could share with other U.S. Clean energy companies looking to expand within Africa? And it would also be great just to hear some of your experience about scaling Natel Energy, and hopefully provide some motivation for other energy companies looking to move to the continent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think maybe I'll pick up actually on one of the points that Mark had mentioned with respect to, and that you also noted as well, with respect to thinking differently, right, about how we build out energy systems across Africa. And because that very much informs our approach, and that's kind of core to how we've developed our technology, how we think about our solutions and then scaling. And that is very much grounded in this more in a distributed future that, you know, in the space that we work in, which is hydropower. Obviously hydro, well, maybe not obvious, but just some of the stats are that, you know, hydropower is the world's third largest source of energy today after coal and gas. And historically, a lot of that installed base has been developed in a very large manner, right, with very large mega projects. And the opportunity that we're focused on is to go distributed and to develop enabling technology solutions that make it possible to develop hydropower resources, but in a much more distributed fashion. And just to give a feel for the sizes that we're focused on, for example, our first project right now that is being developed with our partner in the DRC is a 4.5 megawatt project. It is, so we're not, it's not a mega project, but it's also not a tiny project. So it's kind of this medium-sized project, and the vision that our development partner has is that by developing these kinds of hydropower projects in this size range, so single digit, maybe to low double digit megawatts, these projects then can become part of this distributed backbone or foundation for the grid as we electrify, as we drive out energy access, can then help make this, we can layer in distributed solar, layer in batteries over time. And then particularly in places like the DRC, for example, which has an enormous amount of hydropower potential, where only a tiny fraction of it is actually utilized today, that with this more distributed approach, we can build projects more quickly, get them online, get that power into the hands of the local populations, and support making real progress on energy access, but with renewable energy that also supports a reliable grid. So that's kind of very much how the way in which we work. So the way in which we work is we work with development partners, and in particular, our development partner is My Hydro, working on these first projects in the DRC. To give you a feel where this can scale, this first 4.5 megawatt project is the first of what we expect to be 20 or 30 projects, targeting about 150 megawatts kind of in this first chunk over the next several years. And that's the core initial focus in the very near term for us. Maybe I'll just stop there and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Gia. I think I'll jump to you, Ayan, before coming back to Ifeanyi. One of the challenges, obviously, for all of these projects is financing. So I'd like to hear from you how AFC is addressing the financing gap in the African energy sector, as well as infrastructure in general. And how is the IFC prioritizing the infrastructure value chain? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jacqueline, and definitely an amazing panel. Thanks to the Atlantic Council, Power Africa also for the invite. So I think before I get into this particular, I want us to step back a little bit. When we speak about transition in Africa, energy transition, I think that's a misnomer. And let me just give you a few data. Africa today contributes around 4% to the current stock of emissions that is out there. So that means 96% has not been caused by Africa. And you take that 4%, you will attribute it to some very large countries that have developed a little bit more. And that South Africa and Egypt actually account for 60% of that, followed by Algeria and a few other countries, 4 or 5. So when you talk about transition in Africa, it's really not energy transition for the bulk of Africa. Where we need to transition from a scientific point of view, it is to transition from the fact that we're depleting our forests. We are using mangroves for cooking. So there is a whole transition of supporting clean cooking initiatives that will transform and will save the world in adding more forest cover, mangroves to basically bring down global temperature. So in the context of finance, AFC is very big in the financing side. We are number one of the largest players in wind power. We've developed a small wind farm 10 years ago in a small island state. Recently, we looked at Djibouti and did 60 megawatt plant in basically wind. We also did 2 hydro plants, Singora in Ivory Coast, Today, we are the leading player with 1.4 gigawatts of pure wind. We acquired Lekela, which already had 1 gigawatt of power, in addition to our 400 megawatts of energy. So that makes us 1.4, 10% of the companies that are supported under the Marks network. So we're the leading player in renewable energy. In the next few years, we're going to add 2 to 3 gigawatts of solar and wind, geothermal, and hydro. So the second question is that Africa is also endowed with significant amount of gas. So we cannot, given the low emission profile, we cannot say we're going to abandon that. And until solar is stable, we do need significant amount of gas to be looked at as a transition instrument. And that is accepted today within the convention. So in our head up to COP, and there was a lot of discussion about battery and metals. So AFC, we work across the value chain on what Africa needs. Africa needs power. It's an access story. It's a power access. So it's not a climate change problem. It's an access story. And I fully agree with our panel. We need to increase that access. We need to divert future emissions as Africa grows, but it is not a problem that kind of need to be solved. It is a problem because we don't have energy access. Energy is so important, not just for people to see, for kids to learn, for people to have the right sanitation, but also for industries. A huge part of Africa, 80% of our exports as a continent are still primary materials. For us to increase value capture, we need the energy to move up the chain a little bit to level 1, level 2, and level 3 of the industrialization. So in stabilizing this, actually, we are a key player in mining and resources. We are the only player that still remains on the ground that's looking to get the transitional metals that everyone is talking about, because the house of these metals is actually Africa. We don't want these materials to leave us as raw resources, but we need to create the right industrial parks. That's another area where AFC plays a key role. We have a net zero park in Gabon, which is a primary source where we've invested in the manganese. We supported a net zero park with Olam, and then we build a port. We're very active in ports and logistics because we can all talk about what is happening today in terms of power. But if you can't get markets to connect, Africa is a humongous market internally, and we haven't been structured that we can intertrade and we can do that type of work. So that's at the core of what AFC tries to solve, is to increase the value capture, build the resilient infrastructure that the continent needs, and then we overlap it with the right power as well as the right fiber optic. We laid down the first fiber optic that connected West Africa to Europe. We sold that company, Main One. So we are today a 10 balance sheet, investment grade house. We borrow from Europe, we borrow from Japan, we borrow from Korea. In our bonds are highly demanded. That's how we increase the financing. This year, I think in the run up to COP, you're going to hear a lot about resilience. I am sitting in Nigeria together with Efi Anye. The country is 2/3 underwater. So we can't just talk about energy transition. We need to talk about how do we build resilience of the communities. You can have a house with a solar, it's probably sinking today. So how do we build this continent so that it's resilient to the impacts of climate change that we haven't caused? That is going to be centered in COP27. We have to see how the US and Africa can come together in looking at this massive issue that is affecting the continent in a very disproportionate way, where you have significant droughts in the east, which have left many people without water, dying, to what's happening today in Nigeria, where 36 states are underwater. So these are the issues that we need to grapple with and also lay down. We are active, we're using African primary capital, and we have shown that we solve what are the critical issues to Africa. It is for us to solve the continent and to do it with determination, with proper management governance, balance sheet that has produced the returns that investors do want. So we are in the market for the Infrastructure Climate Resilient Fund, which is a blended fund that looks to climate-proof infrastructure, power, transport, and ICT. So that is AFC's response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayan. I like that. We're going to do this with determination. And on that, Ifeanyi, as someone who is on the ground doing this with determination, I'd like to hear from you just about your experience kind of with lowering the cost of solar energy. We've seen over time it's become more affordable, which provides an opportunity for more access. But yeah, would just like to hear your experience working on the ground. And then I'll ask another question after that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jacqueline, for the question. And I would like to also acknowledge Ayan for the comments. I couldn't have said it any better, and especially as it regards the topic on building resilient infrastructure and ecosystem to then form the basis for all the activities around the energy transition. But jumping right into the question, I would say technically, especially more recently, it hasn't been actually that easy trying to drive down the cost for energy. Although we are seeing substantial price reduction on perhaps the equipment and some of the other technologies that are needed to drive this narrative. But due to some of the inadequacies around the enabling environment, which I talked about, from a Nigerian perspective around the duplicity in the exchange rates and the wide margin that we have thereof, it makes it significantly difficult to actually achieve this. But nonetheless, some of the activities that we have been doing as a company towards ensuring significant level of affordability of the service to numerous off-takers scattered across 4 different regions of the country. This includes economies of scale in procurement and system deployment activities. And by doing this and also ensuring some sort of standardization in the offering and in technology that we deploy, we are able to significantly reduce the cost. And some of these efforts are currently now being amplified by some of the recent programs and initiatives that are now springing up in Nigeria, some of which are the DAP program of the GIAP initiative of Rockefeller Foundation being implemented by Odyssey and Olon, which with the sole aim of actually aggregating procurement in the distributed renewable energy space in the country to one, drive down costs and improve and streamline the processes applicable for getting some of these equipment into the country in the most efficient and cost-effective manner in the short and medium term, while in the long term also supporting technologies that can further domesticate some of these technologies to then create jobs and reduce the significant dependence on a balance of trade among nations that are putting pressure on the local currency and thereby escalating costs significantly from the local currency perspective. Then moving on that, we are also now implementing what we call clusterization of some of these solutions that we deploy, that instead of now having them in several pockets, as used to be the case for us, we're now leveraging and growing more linearly in locations where we already have existing presence. And this would help us to significantly optimize our operational cost as much as as possible. Then Mark talked about the need and the importance of blended financing as regards to clean energy financing and deployment. And this is also one of the very critical instruments through which we are thereby reducing the levelized cost of energy to the off-takers, and maybe making this our services a lot more affordable to our off-takers. Then tied to that is then the digitalization of our processes. And I think this I would want to spotlight this a lot more, considering also what Ayan talked about, the need to build resilience. I think for us, this is one of the biggest takeaways we had from the COVID-19 lockdown, where most of our it became an issue to manage most of our sites scattered in several parts of the country due to the restrictions in movement and all of that came with it. But by improving the capacity of our team and also introducing significant level of digitalization and technology in our processes, in the recent flooding incidents that have happened, we observed that we weren't then limited in any manner, because through the adoption of technology, our more experienced technicians and engineers are able to work in real time with some of the site managers we have in what you might consider the remotest part of the country, to ensure that we keep the lights on, to ensure that there is reliability in service delivery and the likes. Then also importantly is because it will be very difficult to talk about the aspect of lowering costs and also ensuring affordability of service without talking about the importance of productive use of energy. Because ultimately, by stimulating productive use of energy in some of these off-grid communities, you're not only making the services available for productive activities, but also you're significantly changing the ecosystem in some of these communities, thereby improving the purchasing parity, improving livelihoods, and ensuring that people have more earning power and disposable income to then be able to afford energy services. So for us, we have targeted commercial incentives that is solely aimed at boosting the productive use of energy in all our operating and planned mini-grid sites across the country. So I would stop there here for now and allow the other panelists to jump in on this as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ifeanyi. And I think before you move on, what can partners such as the US or philanthropy, you mentioned GAP's initiative, what more can they do to support increasing energy access?
Yeah, so thanks, Jacqueline, for the follow-on question. So when Mark was making his opening introduction, he rightly did mention that the relationship between GVE and US government agency actually started as early as 2014, which was 2 years after we got incorporated. And through the support we've been able to get and follow-on support that has been able to open up, we've grown from a team of just 3 to a team of 68 people at the moment, serving more than 10,000 households and businesses across 7 states in the country. But like you rightly mentioned, that's pretty much a scratch and the surface compared to the need and the challenge that actually exists. And through some of these early work, we've seen partners like the World Bank and African Development Bank jointly commit about 550 million US in as a loan to Nigerian government, which was then converted by the government to performance-based subsidy, which have significantly increased the rate of energy access in the country over the past couple of years. As of yesterday, it's recorded that so far the Nigerian electrification program being implemented by the RAA of Nigeria have crossed the 1.2 million mark of new connections since the program was started. So with all these change of activities in mind, it's actually setting the tone to what would be happening in the near future. And some of the things we'll be needing them to do is maybe figuring out and coming up with additional incentives around corporate guarantees, around things like currency hedging and things like that, that would then allow more institutional private capital, because with the level of deficit that is inherent in the continent, donor funds can only but scratch the surface. What we need to actually get going and ensure that by 2030, we are able to all celebrate that Africa has achieved universal energy access. Private capital would play a very significant role in ensuring that happens. So the multilateral agencies and the donors, I would encourage them to actually then focus on getting the right instrument, getting the right framework that would then make it more effective and attractive for private capital to play a more enhanced role in the sector.
Thank you so much, Ifeanyi. I mean, we're getting close to time, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the audience and would really like a few short answers, if possible. It's a fascinating conversation, but unfortunately, yeah, we are running out of time. So, Ayan, really quickly to you. I mean, you mentioned the stats about how Africa only contributes about 4% to GHG emissions. So, the question that we're hearing a lot, in the lead up to COP is really around loss and damage, and the development of Africa's fossil fuel resources, especially gas. How can African countries really strike the right balance of what they need, but also equally pressures to decarbonize as well as other competing global demands?
So I think Africa is actually leading the way in the decarbonization effort, but we are still missing the mark on that conversion from cooking with these valuable carbon sinks into. I think there hasn't been enough efforts made in conversion in terms of education from clean solutions into even gas and other. However, I think Africa, it's not about loss and damage. Resilience means Africa has an infrastructure deficit of 2.3 trillion. It hasn't been built yet. So what we're saying is don't build it in the old way. Integrate resilience, you don't have loss and damage. So it's not about loss and damage. It's about understanding the science. We already have a warmed world. We are at 1.1 degree. That means we're seeing stressors that are unprecedented in terms of the wind factors, the drought factors, and we are seeing also significant amount of natural disasters that are so often like what we are dealing with in Nigeria, which is a big country for us where we are involved in the infrastructure. So since some of those haven't been built, we need to integrate resilience measure. It's a prevention. That means those assets will be longer in tenor. They will not break down in catastrophe. There will be no loss of business. They are what is going to link to food and agriculture. So it's a prevention so that you avoid loss and damage. So this is the only continent where we have an opportunity to build resiliently so that we can avert future crises. And that is, I think, at the core of resilience. It doesn't mean that we are looking for loss and damage right now. We're looking for the insurance industry, if we build resiliently, to reduce the premium because these assets will not break down as much and that it will have less operating and maintenance, which means they will be more profitable longer term. So we do need also the technologies in resilience that are in the US, in Europe, in Japan, Korea to also reach the African markets. And so I think it's at the core of that. Africa is already on a path to increase access with clean energy. Yes, a lot of money. We still need a couple of trillions to close the gap. However, what is key is we also need to adapt, because at 1.1, we already have a warmed world. And that's a message we shouldn't lose.
Thank you so much, Ayan. I'll quickly go to you, Mark. I mean, the gas conversation is one that we've seen, expand and explode more recently with a lot of countries who do have new gas discoveries. So we'd just like to hear from you, because global financial institutions are looking at phasing out fossil fuel finance. I mean, what's your view? What do you forecast will happen?
I
don't
get the forecasting game, because that's a dangerous place to be. Two quick points. I think I just want to hit what Ayan said really quickly. Resilience and building resilience is absolutely critical. I hope everyone's aware that President Biden announced the emergency plan for adaptation and resilience, or the PREPARE program, to help 500 million people build resilience to the impacts of climate change. We see it. It's absolutely critical. And building it right from the first time, Ayan's right. I mean, this is an opportunity as much as it's a challenge. So, wow, what a way to build infrastructure that works over time and not have to keep paying to redo it, as many other places are going to have to do. So he's also committed to working with Congress to try to provide $3 billion annually for PREPARE by 2024. So a big part for us as well. On gas in particular, look, we have guidance. We can still work on gas where it's appropriate. We have ways to make sure that we're trying to, we're always renewable first, right? If there's a renewable solution, I think it's a smart one anyway. That's where the market's going to go, right? People have resources, of course. There's going to be individual pathways. It's a theme we heard a lot at UNGA this year and in Climate Week. There's a lot of things that we want to work that will be probably fossil free because we want to push renewable energy solutions, and we know that market needs to be accelerated. And then there's going to be gas projects in Africa, and the U.S. government will look at those through guidance we have to make sure it has development impacts and a number of other things to look at it. We understand that is a sovereign decision, and one that needs to be supported in different ways in different places over time. But again, want to go back to the positive. We talked about where the money is going to go. We talked about stranded assets. You mentioned is a concern. So if you're going to build something, build it right. Build potentially with green hydrogen in mind. Build ways to look at stuff. If you have gas assets like Nigeria does, they have a lot of leadership here to talk about how to make them more efficient. How they have underperforming assets. That's a sunk cost. You've already built it. How do you make that better? Gas flaring in terms of fossil fuel, and making sure the stuff we do, if we do it, has the best possible opportunity to get the power to the people who need it, to make sure it's tied to energy access, to make sure that if we look at those, you see an appreciable uptick in what people need across the continent. As I said before, energy transition is probably a misnomer. A lot of people are getting onto the energy ladder for the first time, even in too many cases. But doing that in a way that won't cost more later or has to be undone, and also has wonderful climate effects for what the whole world needs as a whole going forward, seems like a smart bet. And then so many folks like us and others are out there, and Ayan want to push capital into this space. So we're trying to work on enabling environment. We're trying to bring technology like Natel over. We're trying to look at GVE as companies who can build this out in a really appreciable way. To me, that is the resilience of the system. You build smart from the beginning. You try to make sure people, both on a infrastructure level, but also on a community level, on a national level, understand and see what's going on. But no doubt there will be an energy mix going forward. We're not immune to know that obviously certain types of renewable and intermittent energy need to have a base load, and that's different in every single country. So all those technical questions remain, and we're not turning a blind eye and saying only do this. But we are saying this is quite a good bet, and a lot of people are going to help you foster this bet into renewable energy, and they're going to make it a cheaper venture for you to get there. At the same time, costs are coming down. So all of a sudden, this becomes almost a no-brainer of investment. And I think you see capital markets not dictating that, but I think reflecting that is probably a better way as we go forward. So we're excited at COP27 and beyond to make that a reality.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you to all of our panelists today, and thank you all for attending. Unfortunately, our time today has come to a close. And so I would like to also thank my colleagues at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and Power Africa for organizing this event today. In particular, I would like to thank Maya Sparkman, Will Tobin, Luke Knitting, Alexander Tripp, Lizzie Bowen, and Laura Marcedo. Please join the Global Energy Center tomorrow for a panel discussion on opportunities to electrify U.S. military ground vehicles, and on Friday for a fireside chat with Dit Jorgensen, the Director General of Energy at the European Commission. More details will be posted on our website. Just to recap, today's discussion will be available at the Atlantic Council's website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Please share with your friends and colleagues. I hope you have a great day moving forward. Thank you all.